welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on Leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I'm your host and interviewer each week, where on Tuesdays and Fridays we release, we hope, influential interviews with people from all walks of life, whether they are CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, researchers, academics, best-selling authors, movie actors, celebrities. Some cases they are people that are not necessarily household names, but they've survived and thrived through some unspeakable tragedy that have shown the vulnerability and courage to come onto the podcast and help you become a better leader, a better family member, a better human citizen. And today I am delighted to shine Franklin Covey's Megawatt Spotlight on John Mackey. You know him, of course, as the co-founder and visionary behind Whole Foods. He was a 44-year CEO of this organization, now with a footprint of close to 550 stores around the world. His book has just released called The Whole Story: Adventures in Life, Love, and Capitalism. John, welcome to On Leadership.
Thanks for having me on, Scott.
Great to have you, sir. John, I have lots of questions to ask you because your book is a very, no pun intended, open book about the journey of Whole Foods, your own leadership philosophy, your business philosophy. You discuss a lot in there about ups and downs in the business, about acquisitions, potential mergers, things that went right, things that you struggled with, your operational excellence. And so I'm going to ask a lot of those questions today, including, how has the organization done so well in terms of, balancing profit and mission and margin and stakeholders, but also with obviously a keen eye to operational efficiency. A lot of insights, I think, to tease out of your 44 years in this, including how it got started, which is also a great story. John, maybe take a few minutes first and rewind a couple of decades and reorient your professional journey to all of our listeners and viewers to kind of level set for our discussion around the whole story.
So I grew up in Houston, Texas, went to school at two universities, Trinity University in San Antonio and the University of Texas in Austin. I went back and forth between those two schools. I liked the small classes at Trinity and the more intimate relationships with the professors. I liked Austin better as a city. I had a lot more friends in Austin, so I just kept going back and forth. At a certain point, I stopped trying to get a degree. I have 120 hours of electives, a pretty high grade point average, but I started auditing classes and I just wanted to learn. I stopped. I got off of the assembly line of trying to be a professional. I just was following my own curiosity, kind of my own spiritual journey. And that led me, I talk about it in the book in some detail, but ultimately I ended up living in this vegetarian cooperative in Austin back when I was 23, 24 years old, and still going to school. And I wasn't a vegetarian when I moved in, but I became one, and I had a food awakening. I began to learn how to cook. I got on fire about, I never realized before that what you ate could affect how you felt. It could affect your longevity. It could affect your vitality. It could affect your health in so many different ways. That was kind of an awakening for me. And that led me to work in a small natural food store, and I decided I liked retailing. And I remember coming back to the co-op one night after a particularly good day working at the store, and I told my girlfriend, I said, Renee, why don't we start up our own store? It'd be fun. And she looked at me and she said, I was 23, Renee was 19, and she said, oh, Mackey, man, that'd be so cool. Let's do it. And so we did it. And if Renee had laughed at me or said it was a stupid idea, the idea might have died right then and there, because we didn't have a business background. I'd studied philosophy, religion, the humanities, pretty much wherever my interests went, but business wasn't one of them at the time. However, once we got started, I began to learn very rapidly. First, we made a ton of mistakes. Secondly, I began to devour books on business. And third, my father was a very successful businessman, and he mentored me and helped keep the business from making a lot of mistakes. First store was called Saferway. It was an old Victorian house. Renee and I moved out of the co-op, moved into Saferway, and lived on the third floor. It was a very pure store. It was a vegetarian store. We didn't sell coffee. We didn't sell alcohol. We didn't sell any meat. Very minimal refined foods. And as I like to say, it did very little business. It's not really what the market wanted. And so that was part of the learning. And then what we decided to do is we actually needed a bigger store. And somehow or another, I was able to raise additional capital. And we merged with another small natural food store that was a friendly competitor and rechristened the new store Whole Foods Market. And that store was a great location. And we had a great team put together in the early days, and it just took off. It became the highest volume natural food store in the United States within about 6 months of opening. Went through a tremendously traumatic time because we had a flood that pretty much almost wiped us out, but that also woke me up to the reality of stakeholders because they didn't let us die. They bailed us out. The customers, neighbors came and worked to clean up the store. Our team members worked for free until we could get back on our feet. Our suppliers gave us new inventory. The bank loaned us more money. The investors put more capital in, and Whole Foods got rolling again. And after that, of course, we wanted to open a second store so that we wouldn't be flooded out again, or we would survive if we were. And then that store was also successful. And then we went to Houston, and hey, I got a 400-page book on it, on the whole journey of creating and building Whole Foods Market. But that's the early days.
John, let's expand on the flood, because you write about it in the book. At the time, you were uninsured, and it would have wiped anybody else out. But it seems to me like this was a major inflection point on your business philosophy and how you would organize the culture, the stakeholders. Maybe revisit that and tease out what were some of the lessons that you learned from the flood and post-flood that perhaps have even shaped your entire entrepreneurial mindset, even in this book and today with some of the things you're working on post-Whole Foods?
Well, the flood was a near-death experience. We had 8 feet of water in the store. And Renee, co-founder, my girlfriend, literally was working that night. And it was a Memorial Day weekend. And she had to swim out of the store. And so it's the worst flood that Austin had experienced in 70 years at that time. And they haven't had a worse flood since. So it's been 100 years since we had a flood that big. And we should have died. We'll call it a near-death experience. We had plenty of insurance, but not flood insurance, which at that time you could only get from the government. And so the biggest learning was that we didn't die. And we didn't die because our constituencies, we didn't have the language for stakeholders at that time, didn't let us die. Everybody came in, everybody pitched in to save us because they loved us, because they cared about us. And I saw for the first time that business is in a community, and it has all these different constituencies that it's voluntarily exchanging with, and that you're creating value in so many different ways. You're creating value for your customers with the goods and services you create and provide. You're creating jobs and opportunities to grow and earn more money for your employees. You're trading with various suppliers. If you're a grocer like we were, you have suppliers. You might have hundreds of suppliers, and Whole Foods has tens of thousands of suppliers today. And they're trading with you. Everybody's trading voluntarily for mutual gain. And I'd not really thought about it before. The investors don't have to invest. They invested capital, and they invested more capital after the flood to keep us from dying. They didn't have to. They did it because they thought it would be in their best interest. And the community rallied around us. In the book, I talk about how, we got a $100,000 loan from the bank, which surprised me at the time because I co-signed on it, but my net worth was literally zero at that point. And I couldn't understand why they did it. And many years later, now, about 10 or 15 years ago, I'm at a conference, and a guy comes up and tells me that was an amazing thing Mark Monroe, the banker, did for you back after the flood. And I said, it sure was. We didn't get that money from the bank. I don't know if we could have gotten reopened. He said, oh, John, you don't know what happened. And I said, well, yeah, I do. They loaned us the money. He said, no, John, the bank turned the loan down. Mark Monroe, the banker, personally guaranteed the loan because he really believed in Whole Foods, and he really said he knew you'd pay him back no matter how long it took. And I said, well, I'd like to thank him. He says, you can. He's passed away. So there were so many things like that in the flood, and ever since then, really, I understood that business is part of a community. Business is a value creator in so many different ways in the community, and if it does a good job, it creates these relationships that extend out into the world, a network of relationships. It changed the way I thought about business. Later, when I first came in touch with Ed Freeman's stakeholder philosophy, I realized, oh my God, that's what happened to Whole Foods back in the flood days, and it's happened ever since. We are in these relationships with all these different stakeholders, and we're creating value for all of them. And now it's just a question of trying to do it in a more conscious way.
John, it's obvious in your book that you're in the relationship business, right? I mean, you're a grocer, but really you're in the business of developing relationships and sometimes unwinding them. Your book is quite vulnerable about some of the early breakups you had around some of your partners and founders. Would you maybe share one of those stories? You had one of your partners, I believe Mark, that exited, if that's right, and maybe share a bit about that, and what did you learn about that in terms of expectations, common vision, shared values, and how you unwind relationships in a way that keeps your reputation intact?
Well, sure, Scott. You're talking about one of the co-founders, Mark Skiles, and he came over from when I said Saferway merged with another store. It was Mark and Craig's store that we merged with, called Clarksville Natural Grocery. And Mark and Craig were invaluable. They were both very talented retailers, and they were very helpful. And that's when that first store became so profitable and successful. In a lot of ways, Mark, that's all he really wanted to do, was operate that one store, because it was making so much money. He used to say, well, we don't need to do anything else. We can retire on this one store. It's so profitable. We're making so much money. And I wanted to grow the business. And he reluctantly went along with that because he wasn't really able to stop it. And our second store initially struggled, but it grew over time, became very successful. Whereas the first store was successful right out of the gate in central Austin. As we opened stores in more suburban areas, they were slower growers. It took a while. Our brand wasn't known. It took a while for the market to warm up to our kind of food and our kind of service. And so Mark was sort of opposed to every new store we opened up. And then in 1985, we had opened up 4 stores, 3 in Austin and 1 in Houston. And then we opened up a restaurant in Austin that Mark was opposed to, and that lost money. And for the first time since the flood, overall, the company was just breaking even, maybe losing a little bit of money. And Mark blamed me for all of it. He thought he had nicknamed me Wacky Mackey for lots of reasons, which I go into in the book in more detail. And he really thought I was going to wreck the company. He just thought I was just totally out of control, that I was going to blow it. I just wanted to grow, and we were going to flush it all down the toilet. So we had a lot of conflict. I had Mark. It was dividing the company into camps, the John camp and the Mark camp. And I realized this couldn't go on. It was tearing us apart. So I asked Mark to take I talked to the board. I talked to people I was close to. I talked to Craig, and we all agreed that I had a proposition that they approved, which was, let's let Mark take a 6-month paid leave of absence to see if he can accept my leadership, and we can go on from there if he can. And if he can't, then we have to figure out a way to cash him out and have him move on. And during those 6 months, the company did much better. Those slower stores started to continue to grow. And so that by the time the 6 months had passed, we were back solidly in the black. But Mark still didn't want to follow my leadership. And he was very honest about it. And what he wanted to do was take the Lamar store. And he says, Craig and I will take the Lamar store. You can have the other 3. And I said, we're not going to do that. That's our best store. And also in talking to Craig about it, that would divide the company into competitors again. So that was out of the question. And so I worked with friends and other people I knew, and basically they bought Mark out. I think he got about $300,000 for his 10% ownership in the company. And that proved to be not a good financial decision in the long term for him. But a lot of lessons learned, and it's a theme that repeats itself throughout the journey of Whole Foods, where people want to be the CEO, they want to be the leader, they have trouble accepting sometimes me, and if they can't accept me, then eventually they leave, or I have to ask them to leave.
John, what's the biggest lesson learned from the Whole Foods in Wild Oats relationship? The merger there, and what business lesson might you teach from that?
I don't know how many lessons there were in that merger per se for the business. That was back in 2007, and we were a huge corporation at that point, and we'd done a lot of acquisitions and mergers, and so Wild Oats wasn't unique or different. What was unique or different in that particular situation is the government tried to block the merger.
Right.
The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, considered Whole Foods Market to be a monopoly, and it was so ridiculous then. It's even more ridiculous today because competition is absolutely everywhere. But one of the ways they dealt with that, or the way they would just make up their own category, of which we were and their category was called the Pinos market. We dominated the Pinos market. What the hell is the Pinos market? It's premium, natural, organic supermarkets. In other words, the category that we invented, and that we were mostly the only company doing it. Wild Oats was a competitor that came along later, and so they wanted to keep us from acquiring that, keep us acquiring that competitor. And our argument was that we compete with Trader Joe's, we compete with conventional supermarkets, we compete with Walmart, we compete with Costco, we compete with everybody. Everybody's selling natural and organic foods at that point, and we may have had a bigger selection of it, but there was no barriers to entry, and there was plenty of price competition. So there was no real reason for this, but nevertheless, they wanted to do it. And it was very expensive for us to fight the government. We won in court. It cost us $30 million in legal fees and countless amount of time. You'd think that'd be the end of it, right? But no, they decided that they were going to take us. The Federal Trade Commission has their own court. They have their own administrative court. And so they were taking us to their court. I talked to our attorneys about it, and they said, well, what's that going to cost us? He says, it's probably going to cost you another $30 million. And I said, well, what happens then? We're probably going to lose in their court. And they said, yes, we'll probably lose in their own court since they already think you're a monopoly. I said, well, then you appeal it back into the federal courts. And I said, okay, then would that be the end of it there? And they said, no, that'll cost you another $30 million. And then after that, they could still appeal it to the Supreme Court, even if you won again. So I'm looking at another $90 million in legal fees. And it's like, wow, this is kind of bullying tactics. And I wrote a blog about it. I critiqued the FTC in many ways. And then soon after that, I got investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. I was being accused of insider trading on Wild Oats, for all things, because I was shorting Wild Oats sometimes when Whole Foods was having a bad quarter. I didn't have any inside information on Wild Oats. I just thought if we were doing bad, maybe they're doing bad too. Seemed pretty reasonable to me. But I shorted them at other times as well. And so ultimately, the SEC case collapsed. But at the end of the day, my lesson from all of this was we did ultimately settle with the FTC and agreed to sell off a bunch of stores. And we couldn't even get there until we went and talked to several senators, complaining to them about that we were being bullied by this government regulatory agency, and trying to be coerced through these massive legal fees to just surrender to them. And that the senators wrote the FTC and said they wanted to open up investigations about the FTC's tactics here. And then when those letters came out, then the FTC contacted us, wanted us to make some kind of win-win deal. And we were happy to do that. That disappointed some people who wanted us to fight them to the Supreme Court, but I don't know, $90 million was a lot of money then. It's still a lot of money today, and we weren't going to do it.
John, thanks for sharing that. I found that story in the book so riveting, just understanding kind of the backstory, or at least your version of that story, because I certainly followed that in the news, as did most Americans. I'd love to ask you now, 540 stores, is that right, Whole Foods?
When I retired, that was a year and a half ago, so they've opened a bunch since then, so I don't know how many they've got now. Yes. I'm out of the loop.
Yeah, lucky you. When you've got 540 stores as the CEO, How do you keep the culture as your primary value proposition, not just for customers, but to retain employees, 100,000 plus employees? What are some tips as you scaled to a unimaginable footprint, 540 stores? Anything you did or your leadership team did to keep the magic of the culture together, not just the mission, but the culture that others might learn from today?
It's a great question. One of the first things to realize is that I think too many CEOs take their culture for granted. They, and I always felt like the culture, while it's a collective responsibility, I always felt like it was important that the CEO, and in my case, the only founder still left, that it was a high priority for me. So one of the ways I dealt with that is I got out into the stores a lot. I traveled a lot. It wasn't actually until I retired from Whole Foods that I actually realized, my God, I'm gone 3 weeks out of every month on the road, doing various things, whether it be visiting stores or going to meetings or seeing locations for real estate, whatever. It was taking a lot of time. So I would say there are 3 things that I would focus on. First, since we were growing very rapidly, we were always hiring new people, and they're coming into the culture, and the culture I call it the yogurt metaphor. If you have a good culture, then the new people, the culture will infect them and they'll become part of it. But you can't take that for granted. And so I believe that you have to always be talking about the purpose and the core values of the business. Those things, you have them built into your orientation programs to be sure, but it's like it was important that I talk about them all the time. I was always talking about them in leadership meetings. With my team, I'd always be talking about it when I visit stores or whenever I was doing larger speeches, always talking about purpose, always talking about the core values. And if you're the CEO or the founder, you have to embody those values, because people hear what you say, but as we know, people pay so much more attention to what you do and what you say. If you don't walk the talk, if you're a hypocrite, then you're undermining the culture. So I internalized and became, as much as possible, the values and beliefs of Whole Foods, and I tried to exemplify those values in everything I did. And I think that really is important for the culture. And then it's the third thing is you do a lot by who you promote. If you promote cultural champions, then they will champion the culture. If you promote people that are not good cultural fits, or you hire people who aren't good cultural fits into senior executive positions, then either they'll begin to wreck the culture or the culture will eliminate them. I increasingly paid a lot of attention to the people I promoted and the people that came into leadership spots. If I didn't think they were good cultural fits, I didn't want to promote them, or I didn't want to hire them in the first place. So there's lots of things you can do for culture, but it's important that the CEO make it a priority and not take it for granted.
John, metaphorically and literally, Whole Foods is an operating machine. One of, I think, your probably value props in terms of your profitability, your growth, your eventual sale to Amazon is the operational efficiencies that the expertise you all demonstrated, executed on, replicated. What would you like people to learn? Maybe you're speaking to startup entrepreneurs, mid-cap size CEOs, COOs. Are there any significant lessons you might tease out from how you all became so great at that side, other than brand, culture, product, service, resiliency, tenacity? On the operational side, what would you talk about?
I'm laughing because other than those things, that's like everything you just described.
I get that. But those aren't operational issues per se.
I think actually the most important thing is to never forget who your most important stakeholder is. It's always the customer. The customer is why the business exists. The business exists to create value for customers. And then secondly, you have to decide, you can't be absolutely good at everything. So you have to decide what it's most important to be really good at. In our case, the most important thing for us to be good at, we're competing with very big corporations, supermarkets that had a lot more scale than we did, and particularly in the early days. So we couldn't compete in price. And so we decided to compete on quality. We wanted to have the highest quality food available. That was our number one core value, the highest quality natural and organic foods available. And we decided the best way to exemplify that also was in the perishable section, produce in particular, but also meat and seafood, prepared foods, bakery. We wanted to get really good in those things. And frankly, those were things that conventional supermarkets were not as good at. They were very good at getting center store prices down. They were very good at their operational efficiency. It's very hard to beat somebody like Walmart or Costco in price or operational efficiency. But you make trade-offs when you focus primarily on efficiency and lower costs. And that trade-off is you oftentimes will compromise your quality, your service, the selection of foods that you provide. So we decided to specialize and get really good in those areas. And what can I say? That was a good strategy for us. It worked really well.
John, riveting chapter on Amazon and some of the feedback you got about your leadership and your aspirations on how you hoped the culture at Whole Foods might also infect that at Amazon. What might be interesting for our viewers to learn from that acquisition, their acquisition of Whole Foods, that will make them want to devour the book and the chapter?
I do go into that chapter. That's towards the end of the book, obviously, and I go into some detail. And actually, the whole book is written like a novel, and there's a lot of. This is a flashback. I'm actually on a guided spiritual journey, and I'm flashing back. I talk about that, and then I flash back, and we tell the story about the Amazon merger and how it came about. It is a good story, and how we connected up, what the hopes were, and I oftentimes get asked the question. At this time particularly, do you regret selling the business to Amazon? And the answer is, I regret the circumstances that made that our very best option, because it was unquestionably at the time the best option. We were being challenged by activist shareholders who were trying to take over Whole Foods, who basically just wanted to sell the company to the highest bidder, and they wanted to get rid of our board. They wanted to get rid of our management team. They didn't want to work with us. They refused to work with us to figure out ways to make Whole Foods better. They just wanted to take the company over and sell it and make a quick profit. And so we had a lot of different options in place. And I go into some detail about those options in the book. But let's just say that none of the options were really a win-win-win for us. One of the 7 habits, right? Win-win. And we wanted a win-win-win, good for us, good for whoever we were going to be working with, and good for everyone, good for all of our stakeholders. What would be the solution that would be good for all of our stakeholders? And I was stumped for a long time, and then I woke up one day and I saw it. It was Amazon. That they could be the best solution for us. And I'd met Jeff Bezos the year before, and I really liked Jeff. I thought he's obviously a brilliant entrepreneur, and we actually had a lot of common interest, and we had a good connection. And so but I didn't think Amazon would be interested necessarily in operating physical stores. That was the big question. But we contacted them and we met with them, and then we had kind of fell in love. I mean, we were so impressed with the intelligence of their leadership team and the questions they asked, and we began to see the ways Whole Foods and Amazon could fit really well together. In Whole Foods' case, the biggest payoff we got from Amazon the 2 biggest payoffs were, one, we were able to lower our prices. 4 times in the first 2 years of that merger. After the merger, we made significant price reductions. And Amazon, it hurt our profitability, and Amazon was supportive of it. They also helped us raise our pay. And even though that also hurt profit. So Amazon is a great company, and they take the really long-term view. They have the patience. Jeff Bezos, that's part of their culture. Jeff looks to the long term, and so does the rest of that leadership team. They're willing to make long-term investments that will pay off in the future. That's exactly what Whole Foods needed. We needed the time to lower our prices, even though it hurt short-term profitability. That was the best thing Amazon gave us. The second thing was technology, because Amazon's one of the greatest technology companies in the world. And so when COVID hit and people are locked down, we were at Whole Foods, we began to deliver a high percentage of our food directly to our customers vis-a-vis Amazon's delivery systems and their technology. They could just plug it in. And not that there weren't some bugs initially, but they solved it. And this enabled us to do something that we wouldn't have been able to do very well without them. So the merger actually ended up being a really good thing for, I think, all of our stakeholders. There are some things that happened that I talk about in the book that upset me a little bit over time, but on balance, it was a very good decision for the company. And I do think I get into some good details there that people will want to read about, and it's a good reason to read the book.
Oh, the last chapter, or the Amazon chapter, is worth the book itself. John, do me a favor, reflect on your nearly 50-year career. Is there a leadership mistake that you own where the insight and the result of it has shaped your decision-making process, your impact, your legacy, something that you've made a mistake, you own it, and now it's like a through line for the rest of your career and life?
Yeah. Fantastic question, Scott. Of course, I made a ton of mistakes. Part of the book is outlining my major mistakes and what the lessons I learned from those mistakes. But probably the biggest mistake that I and Whole Foods ever made was coming out of the Great Recession back in 2008. We had our stock price dropped, not a public company, our stock price literally dropped 90%. We were trading at 3 times our cash flow at the very bottom, so that you could have bought our company and paid for it with our own cash flow in just 3 years. And so we were very worried about activist shareholders coming in and taking us over back then. So we took in some private equity money and from a company called Leonard Green. It turned out to be the best investment they ever made because they invested $475 million and they made in just 3 years a $4 billion profit, about a $4 billion profit on that investment. But when we came out of that and our stock began to recover as we came out of the recession, we had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to lean into that and lower our prices. We saw what was happening. We were getting more and more competition from competitors who were copying so much of what we were doing, copying our product mix, copying the way we design our stores, copying our marketing to a certain extent. And we needed to lower our prices, and we knew it, but yet our sales were growing so strongly out of that recession. Our same-store sales were over 10%, that we could call it a confirmation bias approach. It's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that was it. That was my biggest mistake. I asked how we could be getting higher gross margins. Were we raising prices? And the answer I got was, no. We're getting this through greater efficiencies. We have less spoilage, less shrink. We have less. We're getting on the buy side. We're getting bigger, so we're able to buy better. Those things might have been marginally true, but also because we had a more decentralized model on pricing, a lot of the regions were slowly raising their prices they were just nudging them up. It was sort of a ratchet effect. They'd be nudged up, but they wouldn't come back down, nudged up to produce a really strong quarter. And I believe that. That's my biggest mistake. I should have gone and looked carefully on my own and not taken the word of what people were telling me. And as a result, when the competition began to really catch up, we were not easily able to lower prices. Because I believe if we'd been lowering prices after the 2008 recession with that great stock growth, the stock wouldn't have gone up as much. Our comps would have been lower, but we could have positioned ourselves for the long term on a price basis that would have enabled us to probably still today be an independent company. Big lesson. How does that pay off for me going forward and as I do my new business, Love Life, and the rest of my life? Hey, you always have to be considering about what's best for the customer. Put the customer first. And I think in that case, we weren't thinking about what's best for our customers. We were giddy on the fact that our stock was rising so much and everybody's stock options were becoming more valuable. And we just kind of forgot what the fundamental principle of our business was, to create value for our customers. And we had an opportunity to do it. And in some ways, we didn't deliver on that promise.
John, thanks for your vulnerability. I'm not surprised because the whole book is very transparent about how you see what went down at certain parts of the business, and it's a great business lesson. The whole story is a passion of yours, this book, but you're also deeply into another initiative, Love Life. Talk about that.
Got a new business we started up. Got a lot of my retired executives from Whole Foods I brought back, kind of like the gangs back together to a certain extent, plus lots of young new people as well. We have a website, www.love.life, although that's about to change a lot. When we're opening up our first flagship location in the LA area in El Segundo, California, just south of the airport off Pacific Coast Highway. It took over an old Best Buy. It's going to be 45,000 square feet. It's going to be a big location. We want to open a whole chain of them. So what it is, it's a combination. We're calling it basically a holistic health membership club. And so we're going to have a healthy food restaurant in this location. We're going to have a state-of-the-art fitness center. We're going to have a state-of-the-art spa, recovery modalities. We'll have yoga. We'll have Pilates. We're going to have three pickleball courts. We're going to have a medical center. When do people go see a doctor normally? When they're sick. Our vision is to disrupt that. We think the doctor's job is to help people to not need to see doctors. We now have the technology and the assessments where we can get a good baseline established on where people are on their health journey. Yeah. And then we can develop and we can measure it on an ongoing basis with wearables and other timely testing. And then we can create individualized precision plans for each member for them to become the very healthiest version of themselves so that they can, if they have diseases, those diseases can be in most cases reversed, or they can be best prevented in the first place. If they are trying to optimize their health at the highest level, we can help them optimize it. If they're aging baby boomers, we can help them, we believe, live longer. So longevity. We can have a concierge program. The whole idea is that we're going to be this one-stop medical wellness holistic health club. And I don't think anybody's done quite what we're going to be doing there. So I'm super excited about it. I think it's, I will tell you a story. About the first 20 years Whole Foods existed, when new people came in, had never been in the store, I often would see them kind of gawking. It's like, I've never been in a store like this. This store is incredible. How come nobody's done this before? And as time passed and the supermarket industry changed, then Whole Foods became less, it didn't stand out quite as much. But I believe when people go into our first Love Life location, they're going to do the same thing that people did for 20 years at Whole Foods. They're going to look around and they're going to say, this place is incredible. How come nobody's done this before? I'm going to become a member here. And I think then so that's the dream. That's the vision. I'm very excited about it. And it's an infinite game. I mean an infinite game in the sense that any really good business, Whole Foods, I hope lives many decades after I pass from this planet. And I also hope Love Life becomes a similar type of growth trajectory, that it's going to grow, being an infinite game, and people will be customers and members of Love Life many decades into the future.
Well, beyond membership, I want to be an investor because this sounds very exciting. So especially how you describe that. John Mackey, your book is The Whole Story, Adventures in Love, Life, and Capitalism. You're 44 years at the helm of Whole Foods. The book is a riveting read for anyone at any stage, I would say, of entrepreneurialism. Whether you are a startup, whether you're a solopreneur, regardless of where you are leading an organization or what level you're in, it's really a gift, I think, to small and large business, but also not just how to grow a business and create profit, but how to grow a business that, gives back and treats their employees well and really checks off all the measures of success. I wish you great luck in your book, and we're delighted you joined us today.
Thanks, Scott. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate it.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.